As a new day begins over this great city, we are reminded that true strength is not measured by the heights we reach. There are moments in life when a single word, a single glance, a single choice reveals everything about who we truly are. Not our degrees, not our designer clothes, not the balance in our bank accounts, but the content of our character when we think nobody important is watching. Sandra, a young woman who believed respect was something you earned through status, not something you gave freely to every human being. She learned the hardest way possible that the person you dismiss today might be the one holding your future in their hands tomorrow. If you're joining us for the first time, please take a moment to subscribe so you can explore more amazing stories with us. On a warm and damp Tuesday morning, an old, worn-out Toyota Corolla pulled up outside her apartment in Lagos. The car was dusty, showing signs of its many years on the road. The man behind the wheel wore a faded shirt and simple trousers. No designer labels, no expensive watch, nothing that screamed wealth or power. When he stepped out and said he was there to pick her up for her interview at Blue Crane Holdings, one of the biggest conglomerates in West Africa, Sandra laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a mocking, contemptuous laugh that cut through the morning air like a blade. "This is what they sent," she said, loud enough for neighbors to hear. "A driver that is not properly dressed and a car that belongs in a scrapyard, not even a classy SUV." She didn't know that the man standing before her, quiet and patient despite her insults, was Benjamin, the only son of billionaire industrialist Chief Ernest. She didn't know he had been sent by his father on a secret mission. He wanted to test the character of every final candidate before they were hired. She didn't know that her words, her tone, her arrogance were being carefully noted, not by a lowly driver, but by the very person who would decide her fate. The question is, what happens when the person you treat like trash turns out to be the one who could change your life? Sandra was not born arrogant. Like many young people in Lagos, she was shaped by the city itself. A place where appearance meant everything, where your worth was measured by the car you drove, the neighborhood you lived in, the labels stitched into your clothes. She had graduated top of her class from the University of Lagos with a degree in business administration. Her certificates were framed and hung on the wall of her small one-bedroom apartment in Lagos, a constant reminder of how far she had come from her humble beginnings in Enugu State. Her mother, a petty trader who sold vegetables in the market, had sacrificed everything to send Sandra to school. Every school fee payment had been a battle. Every textbook, a small miracle. But Sandra rarely spoke of those days anymore. She had learned quickly that in Lagos, your past was something to bury, not celebrate, unless it was a past filled with wealth and connections. For 6 months after graduation, Sandra had been job hunting. She had attended countless interviews, each one ending the same way. "We'll get back to you." But they never did. Her savings were running dry. Her rent was 2 months overdue. Her landlord had started knocking on her door with increasing aggression. Then, finally, the email arrived. "Congratulations. You have been shortlisted for the final interview for the position of executive assistant at Blue Crane Holdings. A car will be sent to pick you up on Tuesday at 9 a.m. sharp. Please be ready. Regards, Human Resources Department." Sandra had screamed. She had danced around her tiny apartment, nearly knocking over the small standing fan that was her only defense against Lagos's heat. Blue Crane Holdings, one of the most prestigious companies in Nigeria. A job there meant security, prestige, and a future. It meant she would never have to return to Enugu in shame. She spent the entire weekend preparing. She bought a new blazer on credit from a boutique in the neighborhood and convinced the owner to let her pay in installments. She practiced her answers in front of the mirror, perfecting her British accent, the one she had carefully cultivated to sound professional. She rehearsed her handshake, her smile, even the way she would sit, back straight, legs crossed at the ankle. The picture of corporate elegance. By Monday night, she could barely sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities. Executive assistant to the CEO. She imagined herself in glass-walled offices, signing documents, attending board meetings, and traveling abroad for conferences. She imagined her mother's face when she sent money home, enough to build a proper house, enough to silence the relatives who whispered that education was a waste for a girl child. Tuesday morning came with the usual chaos of Lagos. Generators roared to life as the electric company, as always, had taken the light. Street vendors shouted their wares. Okada riders weaved dangerously through traffic. Sandra stood in front of her cracked mirror, adjusting her blazer, applying another layer of lipstick. She was ready. At exactly 9 a.m., she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. She grabbed her handbag, a fake designer piece she had bought at a boutique, and hurried down the narrow staircase of her building, heels clicking against the concrete. But when she stepped outside and saw the car, her excitement curdled into something cold and bitter. A dusty car. Old, with a dent on the passenger side and a faded paint job that might have once been silver, but now looked like the color of disappointment. The kind of car a struggling taxi driver would own, not a prestigious company. And the man who stepped out? Even worse. He was tall, yes, but dressed in a simple shirt that had seen too many wash cycles and trousers that were clean but unremarkable. No tie, no polished shoes, no sign of the corporate world she was about to enter. He looked like someone's houseboy, not a professional driver from a billionaire company. "Miss Sandra?" he said, his voice calm and respectful. Sandra's face twisted. She looked around, hoping her neighbors weren't watching. Of course they were. In Lagos, everyone watched everyone. "You're joking," she said, her voice sharp. "Blue Crane Holdings sent this?" She gestured at the car as if it were a pile of garbage. The man said nothing. He simply opened the back door for her. "I'm not sitting in that," Sandra said, folding her arms. "Do you know who I am? Do you know where I'm going? I'm about to become an executive assistant, and you bring me this scrap metal?" Still, the man remained silent, patient. His eyes, calm and unreadable, watched her without judgment, without anger. That silence infuriated her even more. She didn't know that patience was a lesson he had learned from his father. She didn't know that silence was his way of listening, truly listening, to what people revealed about themselves when they thought no one important was paying attention. She didn't know that her test had already begun. Sandra got into the car, but not before loudly expressing her frustration so that everyone nearby could hear her. She slammed the door harder than necessary, crossed her arms, and stared out the window with the kind of disdain reserved for things beneath her notice. The man, whose name she hadn't bothered to ask, started the engine. It coughed once, twice, then rumbled to life. Sandra rolled her eyes so hard it hurt. As they pulled into Lagos traffic, the silence in the car was thick, uncomfortable. But it wasn't uncomfortable for him. He drove with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove, his hands steady on the wheel, his expression calm. So, she finally said, her voice dripping with condescension, "How long have you been a driver?" "Long enough," he replied simply, eyes on the road. "And they pay you well?" "I mean, looking at this car, I'm guessing not." She laughed at her own joke, a sharp, ugly sound. He said nothing. "You know," Sandra continued, leaning forward slightly, "when I get this job, and I will get it, I'm going to make sure they upgrade their transport services. This is embarrassing. What if someone I know sees me in this thing? Then they would see you," he said quietly. Sandra frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, glancing at her briefly, "that a car doesn't change who you are. It only reveals it." She scoffed. Deep words from a driver. "Did you read that in a motivational book?" He smiled faintly but didn't respond. That smile unsettled her more than anger would have. It was the smile of someone who knew something she didn't. They made their way through the busy streets of Lagos, passing street vendors who balanced trays of plantain chips and bottles of water on their heads. They saw crowded Danfo buses, with people hanging out of the doors, as well as beggars holding out their hands at every stoplight. Sandra observed them all with the same disapproval she felt toward the car. It was a city she could tolerate, but one she didn't particularly love. At a red light, a young boy, no more than 15, approached the car with a dirty rag, hoping to clean the windshield for 20 naira. Before he could touch the glass, Sandra knocked hard on her window. "Don't let him near this car," she shouted at the driver. "These children are thieves. They'll scratch the paint and demand money." The driver looked at the boy, then reached into his pocket and handed him a 100 naira note through the window. "No need to clean. Buy yourself something to eat." The boy's face lit up like the sun breaking through the Harmattan haze. "Thank you, sir. God bless you, sir." Sandra's mouth fell open. "You just gave him money? Just like that?" "Do you know how many of them will swarm this car now?" "He was hungry," the driver said simply. "He was a beggar," Sandra shot back. "There's a difference between charity and stupidity." The light turned green. They drove on, but something had shifted in the air. Sandra felt it, though she couldn't name it. A strange discomfort, like wearing shoes half a size too small. She told herself it was just nerves about the interview, but deep down, in a place she refused to acknowledge, she knew it was something else. They passed through the organized chaos of Lagos, then into the more serene, tree-lined streets of Victoria Island, where the real money lived. The buildings grew taller and shinier. The cars on the road became sleeker, Range Rovers, Mercedes-Benzes, the occasional Lamborghini that made Sandra's heart ache with envy. Finally, she muttered, "Civilization." When they arrived at the impressive Blue Crane Holdings building, Sandra couldn't help but feel amazed. The glass structure soared high into the sky, looking even grander up close. The 30-story building sparkled in the morning sunlight, almost like it was made of gold. Well-dressed security guards stood watch at the entrance, and a beautiful fountain danced in the courtyard. Everything about the place radiated strength, wealth, and a sense of lasting success. This was where she belonged. The driver parked in the underground garage, not at the main entrance as Sandra had expected. She frowned. "Why are we parking here? Shouldn't you drop me at the front?" "This is where I was instructed to park," he said, turning off the engine. Sandra huffed, grabbed her bag, and stepped out without a word of thanks. She didn't look back as she headed toward the elevator, her heels echoing in the concrete space. She didn't see the driver pause, pull out his phone and send a brief message to someone. "Candidate 3 has arrived. Proceed as planned." Inside the building, Sandra was greeted by a receptionist with a perfect smile and perfect hair. She gave her name, was handed a visitor's pass, and was directed to the 15th floor. As she rode the elevator up, she checked her reflection in the polished steel doors, adjusting her blazer, practicing her smile. The 15th floor was all glass and marble. Soft music played from hidden speakers. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and fresh coffee. Other candidates sat in the waiting area, all dressed impeccably, all wearing the same mask of confident anxiety. Sandra took a seat, crossed her legs, and waited. One by one, candidates were called. One by one, they disappeared behind heavy wooden doors marked Interview Room A. Some came out smiling. Others looked shaken. One woman walked out in tears. Sandra's confidence wavered slightly. What kind of interview made people cry? "Miss Sandra?" A woman in a sharp navy suit appeared, clipboard in hand. Sandra stood, smoothed her blazer, and followed. The interview room was smaller than she expected, but elegantly furnished. 3 panelists sat behind a long table, 2 women and 1 man, all middle-aged, all wearing expressions that gave nothing away. "Please, sit," the man said. Sandra sat, back straight, smiled polite, but not too eager. The questions began. Standard at first. "Tell us about yourself. Why do you want to work here? What are your strengths?" Sandra answered smoothly, her rehearsed responses flowing like a well-practiced script. Then the questions changed. "Tell us about a time you helped someone who couldn't help you in return," one of the women asked. Sandra hesitated. Her mind raced. She couldn't think of a single example. She scrambled, invented a story about helping a classmate study, though in truth she had always studied alone, unwilling to waste time on those she considered slower than her. The panelists exchanged glances, wrote something down. "How do you treat people in service positions? Drivers, cleaners, security guards?" the other woman asked. Sandra's stomach tightened. Why were they asking this? What did it matter? "I treat everyone with respect," she said, the lie smooth and confident. "Is that so?" the man said, leaning forward slightly. "So if, hypothetically, a driver arrived to pick you up in an old car, wearing simple clothes, you would treat him with the same respect you'd give, say, the CEO of this company?" Sandra's heart skipped. Her mouth went dry. It was a coincidence. It had to be. "Of course," she said, voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "A person's job doesn't determine their worth." The man smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Interesting," he said. "Thank you, Miss Sandra. We'll be in touch." She was dismissed. As Sandra walked back to the elevator, her hands trembled. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, in the way the panelists had looked at her, in the weight of that last question. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. And that's when she saw him. Walking out of a glass-walled office marked Executive Suite was the driver. But he wasn't dressed in a faded shirt anymore. He wore a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and silk tie. His shoes gleamed. His presence commanded the room. Employees greeted him as he passed. "Good morning, sir." Sandra's world tilted. No, 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 no. Her breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred at the edges. The driver, the man she had mocked, insulted, and dismissed, was Benjamin, the CEO's son, the heir to the empire, and he was walking straight toward her. Time seemed to slow. The elevator doors began to close. But Sandra's hand shot out, stopping them. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare as Benjamin walked toward her with the same calm, unhurried stride he'd had behind the wheel of that dusty Toyota. Their eyes met. In that moment, Sandra saw everything she had missed before. The quiet intelligence in his gaze, the controlled power in his posture, the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself because it simply was. This was not a man pretending to be important. This was a man who had been raised in importance, but had learned to wear it lightly. "Miss Sandra," he said, his voice the same calm tone he'd used in the car. "I trust the interview went well?" Her mouth opened. No words came out. Her brain screamed at her to say something, anything, to apologize, to explain, to beg, but her throat had closed up like a fist. He stopped a few feet away from her, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly as if genuinely curious about her answer. I didn't, she finally stammered, her carefully practiced British accent crumbling into the raw Igbo-inflected English of her childhood. I didn't know, sir. I didn't know what? He asked, raising an eyebrow. That the driver deserved respect, or that how you treat others, even when you think they're not important, could come back to influence your future. The words hit her like physical blows. Around them, employees had stopped walking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone was watching now, sensing the tension, the drama unfolding in their pristine lobby. Sandra's face burned with shame. Her hands trembled. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor, to wake up and discover this was all a nightmare. My father, Benjamin said, his voice steady but with a hint of intensity, started this company from scratch. He began his journey as a bus conductor. Did you know that? Sandra shook her head quietly. He worked for years, saved every kobo, invested wisely, and built an empire. But he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the people who helped him when he had nothing. The woman who gave him free food when he was hungry. The mechanic who fixed his first Danfo bus on credit. The security guard who let him sleep in the garage when he had nowhere to go. Benjamin took a step closer. Sandra instinctively stepped back, her shoulders hitting the elevator wall. When I turned 25, my father gave me an important lesson before I could join the family business. He said, Benjamin, many people can look at a resume and verify qualifications, but true character, that shows itself when you think no one is paying attention. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back, but it was useless. So I've spent the last 3 months doing exactly what you saw today, Benjamin said. I pick up final candidates personally. I dress simply. I drive an old car, my father's first car, actually, the one he bought 20 years ago and refuses to sell. And I watch. I listen. I see who they really are when they think I'm just a driver. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward her. Sandra's stomach dropped. On the screen was a video, crystal clear, time-stamped from that morning. It showed her standing outside her apartment, looking at the car with disgust. It showed her laughing mockingly. The audio played her words back to her, each one a knife. A driver in rags in a car that belongs in a scrapyard. This is embarrassing. These children are thieves. There's a difference between charity and stupidity. We have cameras in all company vehicles, Benjamin said quietly, pocketing the phone. For security purposes. But they also capture other things. Sandra's legs buckled beneath her. She would have fallen to the floor if the elevator wall hadn't been there to support her. Please, she whispered, tears streaming freely now. Please, sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean I was just nervous. I was. You were yourself, Benjamin interrupted, his voice not cruel but final. That's the point of the test, Miss Sandra. Not to see who can pretend to be kind for 30 minutes in an interview room, but to see who is kind when they think it doesn't matter. He gestured to one of his assistants, a young woman who had been standing nearby with a tablet. Miss Sandra's application has been declined, he said. Please process her exit and ensure she's escorted out. No. Sandra's voice cracked, desperation flooding through her. Please, I need this job. My rent is due. I have nothing. She grabbed his arm. Benjamin looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her face. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger. Something sadder. Disappointment, perhaps. Or pity. You said you have nothing, he said softly. But you had something very valuable this morning. You had an opportunity. You had a choice about what kind of person to be, and you chose poorly. He gently removed her hand from his arm. The woman who came in before you? He continued. She thanked me 3 times during the drive, asked about my family, offered to help me carry her own bags. She treated me like a human being. She got the job. Sandra's world shattered. The job, the future, the escape from poverty. All of it, gone. Destroyed by her own words, her own arrogance, her own belief that some people mattered and others didn't. I'm willing to change, she shouted, her voice filled with emotion, not worrying about who might be listening or watching. I can improve. Please, give me one more opportunity. Benjamin paused. For a long moment, he studied her face, the tears, the desperation, the raw fear of someone watching their dreams crumble. My father says everyone deserves a second chance, he said finally. But second chances aren't given, Miss Sandra. They're earned. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Plain white, simple black text. This is the contact for our partner organization, he said, handing it to her. They run skills training and character development programs for unemployed youth, free of charge. If you complete the 6-month program, and I mean truly complete it, not just show up for a certificate. You can reapply to any position in this company. Entry level, not executive assistant. You'll start where everyone else starts. At the bottom, Sandra took the card with shaking hands. But understand this, Benjamin said, his voice becoming more serious. If you decide to return, it won't just be a one-time challenge. You'll face tests every day. In this company, your character isn't just something you show when you need to. It's something you embody every single day. He nodded to his assistant, who gently took Sandra's elbow. Goodbye, Miss Sandra, Benjamin said. I hope the next time we meet, you'll be someone different. And with that, he turned and walked away. His footsteps echoing in the silent lobby. Sandra stood there, clutching the business card, watching him disappear into the elevator that would take him back up to the world she had just lost. The question that haunted her as security escorted her out wasn't, why did this happen? It was far more terrifying. Who have I become? Sandra sat on the steps outside Blue Crane Holdings for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Security had escorted her out politely, but firmly, and now she sat there, clutching that business card like it was both a lifeline and an accusation. People walked past her, men in expensive suits, women in designer heels, all of them moving with purpose, with direction, with the confidence of people who belonged. She had wanted so desperately to be one of them. And for a brief, hopeful moment that morning, she had felt like she was one of them. Now she knew the truth. She had never been one of them. Not because of her bank account or her address or her background, but because of something far more fundamental. Something that no amount of money or education could buy. Character. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord, Sandra. I've been patient. If I don't receive payment by Friday, I'm changing the locks. She stared at the message, then at the business card in her hand. 6 months. 6 months of training for a chance. Not a guarantee, but a chance to start at the bottom of a company where she had almost been executive assistant. Pride whispered in her ear, walk away. This is beneath you. Find another job. Pretend this never happened. But shame, deeper and more honest, whispered louder, you did this to yourself. You have no one to blame but the person you chose to be. Slowly, Sandra stood. Her legs were unsteady, her eyes still red from crying, but she stood. She looked up at the towering glass building one more time, then down at the card. She made a choice. 6 months later, the rainy season had come to Lagos. The kind of rain that turned streets into rivers and tested the faith of every umbrella. Sandra stood outside the same building, but this time she arrived on foot, not in a car. She wore simple clothes, clean, modest, nothing borrowed or bought on credit. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a simple style. No fake designer bag, no practiced accent, just her. The training program had been harder than any university course she'd ever taken. Not because of the skills they taught, computer literacy, customer service, business communication, but because of what they required her to unlearn. They had made her volunteer at a local market, helping elderly traders carry their goods. She had served food at a homeless shelter, looking into the eyes of people she once would have crossed the street to avoid. She had cleaned public schools, sat with sick children in understaffed hospitals, listened to the stories of people whose names would never appear in newspapers, but whose lives were no less valuable than hers. And slowly, painfully, like a bone that had been broken and needed to be reset properly to heal, something in her had changed. She walked into the lobby of Blue Crane Holdings. The receptionist, a different one from before, smiled warmly. Good morning. How can I help you? Good morning, Sandra said, returning the smile. I have an appointment, entry-level interview, administrative support. The receptionist checked her computer, nodded, and handed her a visitor's pass. 10th floor. Good luck. Thank you, Sandra said, and she meant it. The 10th floor was less glamorous than the 15th. Smaller offices, less marble, but it was honest work, and Sandra had learned that honest work had its own dignity. The interview went smoothly and involved just 3 questions. They focused on basic skills, without any trick questions about personal interactions, since her references were strong enough to speak for her. The program director had written a supportive letter, as had the woman who managed the homeless shelter. Even Madame Florence, an older market vendor whom Sandra assisted every Saturday for 6 months and struggled with reading, contributed a heartfelt letter. Her life experience was rich and insightful, showing that wisdom can come in many forms, beyond what you find in books. We'll let you know by the end of the week, the interviewer said. Sandra nodded, shook her hand, and left. As she waited for the elevator, she heard a familiar voice. Miss Sandra. She turned. Benjamin stood there once again in a tailored suit, once again carrying that quiet authority. But this time, when Sandra looked at him, she didn't see a test or a trick. She saw a person. Someone's son. Someone who had chosen to use his privilege not to elevate himself, but to protect his father's company from people who would poison it from within. "Mr. Benjamin," she said, meeting his eyes without shame this time, without desperation. "Good morning, sir. I heard you completed the program," he said. "Yes, sir. Top of your class, according to the director." "I had a lot to learn," she said simply. He studied her for a moment, the same way he had 6 months ago, but this time his expression was different, softer, approving. "The woman who got the executive assistant position," he said, "she's doing well, but we're expanding. In a year, maybe 2, there will be more opportunities. For people who prove themselves." Sandra nodded. "I'm not in a hurry anymore, sir. I've learned that where you start matters less than who you are along the way." Something flickered in Benjamin's eyes. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition of someone who had walked through fire and come out changed. "My father would like that answer," he said. Then, extending his hand, "Welcome to Blue Crane Holdings, Miss Sandra." Officially this time. She shook his hand, firm but not aggressive, respectful but not submissive. "Thank you, sir," she said. "I won't waste this chance." "I don't think you will," he replied. As the elevator doors closed and Sandra descended back to ground level, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride. Pride was what had destroyed her before. Not confidence. Confidence without character was just arrogance in disguise. What she felt was peace. The peace of knowing that she had been broken and had chosen to rebuild herself properly. The peace of knowing that the person she was today could look the person she was 6 months ago in the eye and not feel shame, but gratitude, because that painful, humiliating day had been the beginning of her real education. There's an old Igbo proverb that says, "He who helps another helps himself." But there's a deeper truth hidden in those words. Before you can truly help another, you must first see them. Not as tools to be used or obstacles to be avoided, but as human beings worthy of dignity, regardless of what they can do for you. Sandra learned that the hardest way possible. She learned that respect is not a transaction, something you give only to those who can advance your career or improve your status. Respect is a reflection of who you are, revealed most clearly in how you treat those who can do nothing for you at all. The driver who picked her up that morning could have been anyone. A student working part-time, a father supporting his family, a dreamer with his own story, his own struggles, his own worth. But she never asked, she never saw him. She only saw what he could not give her: status, comfort, the image she wanted to project. And in failing to see him, she failed to see herself. Benjamin didn't test candidates to humiliate them. He tested them because he understood something his father had taught him, that a company is only as strong as the character of the people within it. Those skills can be taught, but integrity must already exist. That the person who mocks a driver today will mock a colleague tomorrow, will cut corners next week, and will sacrifice others for personal gain when the stakes are high enough. Character, in the end, is not what you claim in an interview room. It's what you do when you think no one important is watching. But here's the truth Sandra discovered. The truth that changed everything. Someone is always watching. Not always a CEO in disguise. Not always a hidden camera. But life itself is watching. The universe is keeping an eye on you. Your own inner self is also paying attention. And the person you become in those small, private moments, when you speak to the waiter, the cleaner, the security guard, the stranger who can offer you nothing, that person is who you truly are. So ask yourself, as you go about your day, as you encounter people whose names you'll never remember, and whose faces you'll forget by evening, who are you when you think it doesn't matter? Because one day, you might discover that it mattered more than anything else. I want to let you know that respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything.